Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Father.
So this talk is obviously very dear to me because it talks about who I am, right? A priest, holy orders. And also, this will be a little bit different from the previous talks that I give. I will try to give a very concise theology of the Sacrament of Holy Orders, but really I just want to make myself available here to your questions. So I hope you can cooperate with the way I want this talk to go. I was going to say good questions. Good questions, just a question, okay? It cannot be, it's never a silly question or anything. Anything you would like to ask, you ever wanted to ask a Catholic priest, I'm just going to be here available for your questions. Because I think, I don't know how often you interact with a Catholic priest in a setting in which, he's open to receive any kind of questions. Depending on the level of questions, we will post this online or not. So, but I'm just telling you that I'm open to answer any questions, especially since we are, as you know, in the last maybe 20, 15 years in crisis. We can really call it a crisis in vocation and also a crisis in how the priesthood is being lived out, right? With all the abuse scandals and I don't know what else is coming, right? So just, I want you guys to just ask questions. But first, obviously, I need to give you the essence, right? The theology behind the Sacrament of Holy Orders. So it's good to begin with the Catechism. And the Catechism has a very concise, a very profound, and very clear definition of this sacrament. It says in paragraph 1536, Holy Orders is the sacrament through which the mission entrusted by Christ to the apostles continues to be exercised in the Church until the end of time. It includes 3 degrees: episcopate, or the bishop; presbyterate, which are the priests; and the diaconate, which are the deacons. Right? So that's a good starting point. Right? It is that sacrament in which Jesus continues to exercise in the Church and the same mission that gave to the apostles themselves. Right? Through this sacrament, the mission that Jesus gave to the 12 apostles continues in the world until the end of time. Right? So it's almost like a fulfillment kind of a sacrament, right? It's fulfilling a mission that is entrusted by Jesus. So it's good to begin with Scripture and the biblical origins of this sacrament to understand, its basic function within the Church. We find, in Scripture, especially in the book of the Acts of the Apostles, a very early structure and leadership within the Church. And so we're going to examine some of these texts here. So Jesus, right, as we know, he established a community of believers, right? We call the Church. He establishes that. First, he calls individuals to become his disciples. And among the first disciples were those who will later become apostles. Right? So in Matthew chapter 4:25, we read the following. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis and Jerusalem and Judea and for beyond the Jordan. Great crowds, right? So did Jesus have only 12 disciples? No. You know, if you ever go to the Holy Land, they will tell you that the numbers that are written in Scripture when they describe the amount of people that were following the Lord, and then you know they tell you a little bit about the population in these towns, it's pretty much the whole town that was following Jesus. Like, can you imagine like the authorities of those towns knowing that there were nobody in their homes, nobody in their marketplace? Where are they? Where's the whole town? Following this man, Jesus, right? So, yes, great crowds, right? A lot of disciples. But very early, we discover the first biblical root of holy orders. The choice of the 12. Right? Among those hundreds of disciples, Jesus, and we read this in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verses 12 to 13. In these days, he went out to the mountain to pray. And all night he continued in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles. So we hear the distinction, right, from early on. There were many, many, many disciples, but among them, he chooses 12, and he changes them, the name apostles. As we know, or if you remember, apostles means to be sent. Right? And again, we compare this to the definition of holy orders, right? And it's a sacrament through which the mission entrusted to the church, right? Mission has to do also with this word to be sent, right? In mission. And so we hear very early on in the Gospels that Jesus is interested in doing something with the structure of the whole church. So, although Jesus had many disciples, only 12 were called to be apostles. And during his public ministry, Jesus worked closely with these apostles. Right? They became very. They lived together. They followed him everywhere. You know, he went. And if you remember some of the passages, he would be preaching in parables, which were stories about daily living. But he had a lot of imagery and stories, and he did not explain the parables to everyone, but to the 12 he did. Right? It's not that it was like a secret knowledge, but he was doing something here, right? He was equipping this man to do something later, right? When Jesus would ascend to his Father. So there are certain tasks, right, that he gives only to the apostles that he didn't give to all the other disciples. So let's begin with the role of Simon Peter. So Peter is the first to be called to this special leadership. Jesus declares of him, "And I tell you, Simon," we know that Simon was later called Peter. "And I tell you, Simon, you are rock, and on this rock I will build my church." So you notice that this translation, I like it because in English, if we say you are Peter and upon this rock, we don't hear the connection, right? So this translation is good. You are rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Matthew 16, 18. You need to remember this and just, okay, Matthew 16, 18, a very Catholic passage. When you go to Rome, and you go to St. Peter's Basilica, after you take a big breath, right, because it's breathtaking, right, when you enter that beautiful basilica. So after you're calmed down, right, after you come to your senses, then look at the beautiful dome from the inside of the basilica. And you will see this passage, Matthew 16, 18, which each letter is like the size of a person. Right? So it's extremely far away from you. It would take maybe a minute or two to drive if you had a car. I mean, if you could go upwards. It's extremely, you don't see it very, very big, right? It changes of perspective. But each letter is as big as a person. And the whole passage of Matthew 16, 18 is right there. And beneath, that dome, you have the bones of Peter there, right? Underneath, catacombs. It's basically, there's a story about the bones of St. Peter. You can find it online. It's very interesting because for many centuries, right, the church knew that the bones were there, but they never really had the serious investigation to find out. And so it's a whole, it's like a movie, honestly. Just read the whole, everything that happened with archaeologists and priests and the Pope's command to do that. Anyway, so you have here how Jesus, right, is appointing Peter with a special role with this church, right? And then basically this command, I will give you the keys of the kingdom. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound on heaven. This is authority. This is authority. It's not just, oh, Jesus, you're so nice. You share your... No. He is doing something here, right? He has a purpose for this. I mean, this is not just any ordinary task. This is not something that we should just say, oh, okay, he gave, authority to some men. Whatever is bound on earth is bound on heaven. I mean, can we just pause for a second and realize what that means? That in this earth, on this earth, there is an authority that comes from heaven, that is ratified in heaven, in eternity. And that goes for both ways, right? For something that is allowed and for something that is forbidden, right? It has eternal consequences. So later, Peter is told that part of his role will be to unify and to strengthen the others, right? And so we have the first pope, right? Which I want to make a distinction. Remember, there are only 3 degrees in holy orders. There's not a fourth, the papacy. Okay, the papacy is not another degree of holy orders. The pope is the Bishop of Rome. Always. The Bishop of Rome and the successor of the Bishop of Rome is always a pope. It's automatically, he is automatically the successor of Peter, right? Because he is the successor of the previous Bishop of Rome. So notice that the papacy is not another degree of holy orders, not a new sacrament. Okay? But we see that, out of those 12, Jesus chooses Peter for this very special role. And we see how he is to be the sign of unity, Peter, and the one who is supposed to strengthen his other brothers. And he says this in Luke chapter 21, verses 31 to 32. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I, Jesus is speaking, but I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. Right? So can you imagine? This is a special prayer of Jesus to Peter. These texts obviously are extremely important because these are the basic or the basis and biblical model of the office of the Pope. What Peter was for the early church, so also is the Pope today for all of us in the church, right? So it is important also to realize that all the bishops, right, all the other apostles in this case, they also share in that binding and loosing. There are different ways in which this authority is being exercised in the church. So now let's talk about the office of the apostles. So we started with the role of Simon Peter, which are the basis of the papacy, and why we have a pope. But then the office of the apostles, right? There were other important tasks that were entrusted only to the apostles. And for example, they alone were present when Christ celebrated the first Eucharist in the upper room, the Last Supper. And it was they who received the command, do this in memory of me. Which, by the way, this, if you read it or if you hear it in the original language, Aramaic or Hebrew, the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. Yes, some words are different, but it's because Aramaic is, it's not a written language. And that's why, the Bible, it was written in Hebrew, because it was a different language that was spoken and a different language that was written. So Hebrew was the written language of the Jews. So do this in memory of me. If you hear that in the original, it's a word that denotes what priests would do. Basically, if we want to translate this phrase, do this in memory of me, we would hear it in our modern ears, and in English, we would hear it as, perform this sacrifice in memory of me, right? So this word, do this, is the same word that they would describe what the priest would do in the temple. And we know that a priest is always in connection with sacrifice. Right? That's part of the essence of what a priest is. He offers sacrifices. Right? This applies to even pagan priests. Right? The Aztecs, they had a priest. The Mayans, they had a priest. What does that mean? Well, it means that they offered sacrifices. So the Jewish people, they had a priest in the temple. They would offer sacrifices to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the true God. And so when Jesus is using this language in the Last Supper, do this in memory of me, he is establishing the priesthood of the New Testament. And we know what is going to be the sacrifice. It's not going to be an animal. It's going to be himself, right? Jesus. He will be the Lamb of God. So also the apostles were present when Christ gave them authority to forgive sins, right? It was not this huge crowd. It was only to the 12 that Jesus appears, the risen Christ appears in the upper room, and he gives them, the authority to forgive sins. This is in John 20, verse 19. So it is important to know then, what's the logic for giving this 12 certain powers, right? And authority. Well, it was to be exercised among the community of believers. Right? So these are appointed to serve the community. Because it is Christ himself who is serving the members of his body. And so it is a sacrament of service. It's a ministry. That's the word ministry. It has to do with serving. Right? So, as we can see, that's why not any baptized person is able to confect the Eucharist. Because we are preserving these actions of Christ, that he chose certain men for a specific ministry, a specific office that would, because he didn't say, do this in memory of me to everyone. He said this to specific men that he chose, right? So, and there are other things, right, that he commands everyone to do. Love one another, right? This is my commandment, etc. I mean, there are other things that he gives to everyone. But there are certain particular tasks and actions that is only reserved to a special group. And so that's why, who can forgive sins? Not all the baptized, but certain men who were appointed and sent for this mission. The same with the Eucharist, which we can here, it demands to talk about the two levels of participation in the priesthood of Jesus. The baptized are or have the dignity of priests as well. And not only priests, but prophets and kings, right? Because remember that when you are baptized, you are being configured to Christ. You are made a member of his body, right? And since Jesus is the priest, the prophet, and the king par excellence, right? We don't have many kings. We only have one king, right? And really, the prophet par excellence, obviously, is the Word of God becoming flesh, right? And also the priest is Jesus alone. Because a priest is a mediator between heaven and earth. A priest is a mediator between God and men. Who is like Jesus, that in his person, he has two natures. Human, the world of men, right? And his God. He in himself, he is the bridge. He is the mediator. He is the only mediator par excellence. Right? So, yes, I'm a priest. Father Christopher is a priest, and Father so, yes, we can be called priests, but there's only really one priest alone. We are configured to his priesthood, the priesthood of Jesus Christ. It is through his priesthood that we, people, have access to the Father. But there are two ways to participate in his priesthood. One is through baptism, and the other one is through the sacrament of holy orders. And not everything that not everything that is entrusted to the priest can be entrusted to the laity, the baptized. Okay, different configurations. And we have names to distinguish this, right? The priest that received the sacrament is called ministerial priesthood. And those who are baptized, it's called the royal or common priesthood. Okay? So that there are two ways to participate in the priesthood of Jesus. How do you participate in the priesthood of Jesus? Well, offering your sacrifices, right? When you exercise virtue, when there's temptation comes your way, and you offer a sacrifice, when there's a death in the family, and you offer that to the Lord, when there's an illness that you are suffering from, and you offering that sacrifice for the salvation of the world, then you are exercising your priesthood there. How do I exercise my priesthood? Well, of course, because I'm baptized, I do that too. But also, most important, right, when I am at the altar, when I'm at the confessional, when I am anointing, right, when I am doing what Christ is entrusting to me, and I am acting in persona Christi, which that is a characteristic of the ministerial priesthood. In persona Christi is in Latin, in the person of Christ. What does that mean? It means that when you hear the priest say words or phrases like I or my, it's not really I, but it's Jesus. It's the I of Jesus. Jesus is using my voice and Jesus is using my body to touch us, right? To touch the world, and to touch the baptized, and to touch really everyone who is receiving that sacrament. So when you hear, for example, at Mass, this is my body, Jesus speaking. When you hear, I absolve you from your sins, it's Jesus. When you hear, this is my blood, all the same thing. You know? So all these words, they tell you that that's kind of like the reason for his coming up with this sacrament itself. It's because Jesus wants to continue to exercise his role here as the head of his body. Okay. So, some may wonder, how do we know that, okay, he gave this authority and these powers to the apostles, but how is it that we have the same power and authority now? Well, first, because Christ would not give a mission that would be attainable by the 12 themselves, because the apostles died, right? They only lived, 50, 60, I think John died when he was 90. He didn't die as a martyr. So, go and baptize all nations. First of all, America was not even discovered when Jesus gave that mission. So, this is logic, right? If Jesus is commanding, go and baptize all nations, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. Well, obviously, this office had to be passed on. And as a matter of fact, we have evidence for this in the Bible itself. Remember that Judas killed himself? And he was part of the 12. Well, they recognized that they needed to protect that number because that was something that the Lord had instituted. And so they needed someone to replace Judas. And who replaced him? Somebody said it. Matthias, right? And how? Do we have access to some form of ritual by which, yes, laying on of hands. That's how the authority and the power was passed on, by laying on of hands, right? And so, early on, remember, these are seeds of what we have now. But everything is in Scripture, even that. And so, you know, this we can say this privilege, ministry, and powers, it doesn't cease with the death of the apostles. So those powers are handed on, and the ministry is being shared throughout the centuries. Something that is really beautiful, and when I learned about this, I was just blown away, is what we call the apostolic succession, right? Which is exactly what I am describing. You know, how the ministry of the apostles is being shared throughout the centuries through the laying on of hands, right? Well, I mean, for example, do we have the apostolic succession of the Bishop of Rome? Yes or no? Do we have the names?
Yes.
We even have mosaics of each pope. 266 times it has been passed on from Peter to Pope Francis. And I mean, while maybe I don't think we have the records of 2,000 years, but I'm pretty sure that if I am serious about this, I could go maybe 100 years of my own ordination, right? Because a bishop is the one who confers the holy orders. A bishop is the only one who can ordain a man to become a priest. So, you know, who ordained me? Cardinal Leonardo, right? And who ordained him? A bishop. Another bishop. And that bishop, another bishop. I'm pretty sure, you know, if you track, you could go maybe, I don't know, more than 100 years or more than 500 years. I've never tried it, but I'm sure, you know, there are serious investigations about that. And so it's just beautiful to know that it goes all the way back to one of the 12. To one of the 12. So this is kind of like a historical proof of the Catholic Church, you know, that it is true, that it really founded by Christ on the apostles. And this is something that Jesus wanted us to have for, I guess, our modern mind later on in the centuries, you know, that we question everything, you know. And also because of the split of the church in different churches, Protestants, right, they don't have that. They don't have the apostolic succession. Therefore, they cannot confect the Eucharist. Therefore, they cannot forgive sins. Because they're not acting in persona Christi. Because Jesus only acts through his ministers that he appoints. So, that doesn't mean that Jesus is not going to give grace to other Christians, right? Through his word, through many things, but they don't have the Eucharist. You know, like for example, if you hear another church, I don't know, whatever church, right? And they say, well, we actually believe in the true presence of Jesus. Let's say they don't, right? But let's say they actually believe exactly like Catholics believe, that it is the true body and blood of our Lord. Is it really? No. And we should say, okay, now you believe because there's evidence everywhere in Scripture and early Christianity. Okay, now you believe in the Eucharist, but what you are getting are crackers. You're not really getting the body. If you really want the body and blood of our Lord, then you have to come where the apostolic succession resides and the true power to infect the Eucharist exists. So it's not just because they believe suddenly it is the body of Christ in their church. Right? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is about deacons. So as the church grew in size, right, there was also the need for the apostles to share their powers. 7 men are appointed deacons. We have that in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, verse 3. And these 7 men that are called deacons, really the word deacon is servants, or it's the same word for waiter in a restaurant, right? It's the same, servants, right? So 7 men are appointed deacons to assist the apostles in Jerusalem. They are appointed to this task. Guess how? By the laying on of hands, right? Because it's truly a sacrament. It's an office. And if it's a sacrament, it is going to be the laying on of hands. And Paul and Barnabas, prior to their mission to the Gentiles, have hands laid upon them for their task. Right? And that's important to know. Paul was also a priest. We can say that. Presbyter. Right? That's the name that you hear in Scripture. You don't hear the word priest. The word priest, we really refer to as presbyter. You won't find that the apostles themselves were called priests in the Bible. Some theologians, they give their theories, and it's because early Christianity, they wanted to be distinct from the Jewish priesthood. Okay? So that's why they didn't call themselves priests, but hieros, which is in Hebrew, hieri in plural. They didn't want to be called like the Jewish priesthood because this is different. And so they used the word presbyter, which some Bibles, they translate it as elders. But it's the same word. I'm a presbyter. Right? And I can tell you a little bit about this. Some people say that it is better to call ourselves presbyter and not just priest, because we are configured to Christ not as only priest, but priest, prophet, and king. Right? And if I call myself priest, it kind of reduces that my ministry is only a priest. But no, I'm also a teacher, right? And I'm also I have this governing authority, right, to a certain extent as a parochial vicar in the position where I'm at. So that's why, for example, in Mexico, the priests, they sign PBRO. So if I were a priest in Mexico, that's how I would sign it. It's the short version of presbyter. Right? So anyway, it's just interesting, right? But just so you know that it's differences in languages. Okay. Okay, so just kind of wrapping things up. Holy orders, then, is conferred in 3 degrees: bishop, priest, deacon. According to Scripture and the early text of the church, right? We can see that distinction already. You may be founding, if you're serious about this, and if you start reading writings of the early church, you may not find priest yet, but you will just find the word bishop. And it's because it was starting. The church was barely starting. But early on, like the 1st century, you can see the 3 offices very clearly. Okay? But it makes sense. Like if the church hasn't grown that much, then the bishop will do everything. Right? But then they had presbyters who would assist the bishop. But the deacons early on in Scripture, we have them. Okay, so now what are practical things? What are the things that the bishop can do, but the priest can't, and the deacon can't?
Make a priest.
That's right. The sacraments that a priest can't do and a deacon can't do is holy orders, precisely. Only a bishop can consecrate someone to the priesthood, to the diaconate, and to the episcopate. And all, obviously, everything that the deacon can do, the bishop can do. Everything that the priest can do, the bishop can do. The bishop is the fullness of the priesthood. That's why, it is the fullness, but for example, it's kind of interesting. It is a different ceremony for each one of these 3 degrees, but is the same sacrament. We don't have 3 different sacraments. It's one sacrament, because it's, again, going back to the definition of the Catechism, the Holy Orders is a sacrament by which the mission of Christ entrusted to the apostles is acted in the world. And it's acted in 3 degrees. So it's the same sacrament, but different degrees. And there are ceremonies, different rites for each one. Right? So, for example, I was made a deacon first. And then I was made a priest. And those who are bishops, they went through the 3. Right? Diaconate, priesthood, and episcopate. So it's just kind of like how grace operates, right? In the same sacrament. It operates 3 different ways, but it's the same sacrament. Okay, so what are the things that a priest can do, but the deacon can't? The Eucharist?
Penance.
I can't hear.
Sacrament of penance.
Sacrament of confession, penance, reconciliation, different names. Different names for the same sacrament. And what else?
Extra unction.
We don't call it extreme unction anymore, but the anointing of the sick, right? Yes. And what are the sacraments that a deacon can do? Baptism, marriage.
We're actually witnesses.
Right.
And some of us have married with a couple.
But you are fulfilling the canonical form, right? If it wasn't because of your presence and witnessing, a marriage would not happen. Okay, so those 2, right? Now, this is important to know. I know this is not the topic today, but it's good. In case of an emergency, anyone can baptize with water and the right formula of baptism, which is the name you want to give. Lucy, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. You have to memorize that just in case there's an emergency. So I want you to say it. Let's baptize Lucy. All right? Well, let's do it. 1, 2, 3. Lucy.
I baptize you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Okay, you didn't say it right. I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I'm being critical because remember that each sacrament has a very specific matter and form. Okay, and if the form is lacking, and if the matter is lacking or defective, no baptism happens. There is one article that is becoming very popular. It's, I think it was last Monday. A priest who had been baptized and doing other sacraments for 20 years. All the other sacraments he did it right, but he recognized that he made a mistake. Instead of saying, I baptize you, he said, we baptize you. And guess what? all those baptisms are invalid. And so obviously there are letters like if you were baptized by this priest, you need to baptize because you're not baptized. And a lot of people's like, what? That is horrible. That is... I'm sorry. This is our theology. Words matter because they were instituted by Christ. We did not invent them. So look what one word did. Nullifies. It's not we. It's the I. Right? It's not that, because remember, in each sacrament, whether it's acting in persona Christi or not, it is Jesus who is acting. It is Christ who confirms. It is Christ who baptizes. It is Christ. Right? All right, so I would like to just mention the religious orders, because there's a distinction of priests. There are diocesan priests and religious priests. I am a diocesan priest, not a religious priest. What does that mean? A diocese is a territory. Okay, so imagine the whole world has a world map, right? That is divided politically, right? The division of countries. Right? Who came up with those divisions? Well, wars, conquering lands, signing certain, statements, whatever, right? But the church has her own division of the world. The church has a different world map. Let's put it that way. Sometimes it matches with the secular division. Okay, but sometimes it doesn't. So how is divided in the church's map? Well, it's divided by dioceses. Okay, and it's just pieces of lands, and they call them, that's a diocese, that's another diocese, that's another diocese. All right, instead of saying that's a country, that's another country, we call it diocese, or that's another state. And no, these are dioceses. And for each diocese, there is a bishop. Bishop, by the way, comes from the word episkopos, which, if you go to the etymology, is overseer. Right? He oversees the diocese. Okay? So, when a man is ordained to the priesthood to work and to have the mission in this diocese alone, he is a diocesan priest. I was ordained for the archdiocese, which is just another set of ways to say that this archdiocese can rule, not necessarily for everything, but for certain matters, it rules a group of dioceses. That's why it's called archdiocese. Okay. But anyway, so I was ordained for the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. That means that I owe obedience to the bishop or the archbishop of Galveston, Houston, and his successors until the day I die. Can I move to? Yeah. There are ways to do those changes, but simple facts, and my intention really was to be ordained for this diocese forever. Okay, so I don't move, I don't go anywhere. And what is really my day-to-day life? Well, whatever the bishop wants, right? I owe obedience. But usually a diocesan priest works in the seminary. The diocese has a seminary there, or he's in a parish, or he works as a chaplain in hospitals, right? Basically, the sacramental life of a parish. Now, there are religious priests. Religious priests, they are members of a religious community. We have hundreds of religious communities in the whole world. The Dominicans, the Benedictines, the Jesuits, all the Passionists, like many, many, many communities. And they have their own leader there. But all religious communities are under the authority of the bishop of that territory. But each community has a leader. Okay?
As a priest, were you allowed to switch? If you had decided you wanted to go the other route, you were allowed to do it.
Yeah, honestly, there is a process for everything. There's a process for everything. Everything you can imagine, there is a process. But obviously, first, it takes investigation, it takes time, it takes interviews, blah, 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 right? And sometimes could be denied. Right? So, but yes, there's a process for everything. There's even a process for me to not being active in the ministry. Right? So, but obviously there's a lot of canonical movements there. Which, by the way, that's a good trivia question. Can I ever cease to become a priest? Well, objectively speaking, no. It's like, can you be unbaptized ever? No. The same thing with the priest. I cannot be unpriested, if you want to make up a word. But I can be removed from my faculties to be exercised publicly in the world, right? And some sacraments, you need the permission of the bishop or the delegation of the bishop to make a sacrament valid. Not all of them, but some. Okay? And so that's why only in danger of death can a man who was in ministry and for whatever reason was removed in danger of death, he can still, forgive sins. He can still, anoint. He can still, be a priest because he's a priest. Okay, so a religious priest is a priest who lives in a community, in a religious community. But in many communities, you don't have to be a priest to be a member of this religious community, right? For example, in Benedictine monasteries, you have brothers and you have priests. So you can be a monk without being a priest. But you live in the community. You just don't do the sacraments and everything that I told you that a priest can do. And there are women religious communities for women. And these are called nuns. And if they are, in mission, they are outside the convent, they are called sisters, and they are called missionaries as well, right? Depending on the character of their community. So, the priest, as you know, but I just want to leave some questions out there, but obviously if you have questions about celibacy, why priests don't marry, right? Can nuns be married? Can monks, So anyway, I will be quiet for a second. And what time is it right now? Okay, we'll take a break. Think about questions. Write them down if you need to. Anything you want to know about a priest, and maybe curious questions about nuns, and I can help you with that. Can women become deacons? Okay. I know there's a lot of controversy and talks about this, especially because Pope Francis delegated like a special investigation of the early church in matters of the diaconate given to women. And so, we don't have the results of this investigation yet, but there was a recent investigation already being done that was done, I think, early 2000. And there's a whole document. You can look it up online. And basically, The early church, they had deaconesses, but not women deacons. What? And I'm trying to make a distinction here. Deaconesses were a kind of like an order. You know, they were order of widows, order of virgins, many orders. And so deaconesses was one of these orders that would help when it was necessary in matters of just handling the rituals, but not at mass. So, for example, in the anointing of the body of those who were baptized as an adults, it used to be an anointing of the whole body. And so the person was naked or half naked for this anointing. And so obviously for women, they needed women to help with that. Okay? And so that's one of the roles that you can find of deaconesses, that they would do that in the early church. But nowhere to be found, obviously, a rite, for example, of ordination of a woman to become a deacon, or even to be on the altar, doing the functions of a deacon, right? So that's why I want to make a distinction in names. Yes, there were deaconesses, but not women deacons. And so, now, can the church change that? I would say that as it is now, I don't think so. And if we bring back the deaconesses, then they would not be doing the same thing as the current deacons in the altar. They would find another role for them, doing something else. I mean, currently we don't do those anointings anymore, so I don't see really the reason to bring them. I mean, it would have to be a completely something new. Sometimes I think, this is just me personally, is that the church as an institution in the world could be tainted by the spirit of the world, in the sense of, for example, the movement, feminist movement, right? It's like that women have to have access to everything that men do. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, women pilots, sure, why only men? Women drivers, yes, why only? But when we talk about church, it's not the same, right? It's not something that we invented, right? But it's something that Christ instituted. And so that's why if we just say, okay, well, women want to have a certain role in the church, okay, I agree. But when they want, for example, to be deacons or priests or bishops, then we are entering into another area. Because it's like saying, the absurdity of how come men cannot become pregnant? Well, it's not in their nature. Well, it's the same thing with the priest, with a deacon, as we understand it in the holy orders, and a bishop, right? I mean, it's just in the nature of it. It's not. It's a configuration to Christ, who was a man. And it cannot be changed. The matter of the sacrament cannot be changed, right? You understand that the matter and the form, right? So the matter in the sacrament of holy orders is a man. Biological man, right? A man. That's the matter. And if the matter is not there, there is no holy order. Just like the matter in marriage. It's a man and a woman. If a priest wants to marry 2 men or 2 women, even if he does it, it's not a marriage, okay? Because the matter is defective. So the same thing with all of the other sacraments. So women deacons, deaconesses, the church could bring them back with a role that would be completely new, because we're not in the early church, and the needs of the early church are not the same as the current church. So it would be completely something different, something that would just make women, it's like, okay, you can have this role. But the need, I don't know. I think, as you know, women have already a huge impact in the faith and, parish life. Look at how many women have leadership positions in parish life. You know what I mean? So I think it's sometimes I think that this is just topics that distract us from what it's really important. But that's just my personal opinion.
What is your life like from morning to night? What did you do today as a priest?
Well, today I woke up at 5 a.m. I took a shower. I prayed the liturgy of the hours. I do the lauds in the morning, and then I had confessions at 6 a.m. and then 6:30 Latin Mass, sort of. And then I just waited in the sacristy to pray the other hour of my liturgy of the hours, and then I was getting ready for confessions at 8 and 8:30 Mass. And then after that, what did I do after the Mass? Oh, there was an anointing, a call for an anointing, and I went to do that. Today I had probably 4 anointings, and so it was one of those days that are busy in that respect. I had meetings with parishioners in my office. I prepared a little bit for this talk tonight. I called a couple of friends to talk about a conference that is coming up. Then confessions, 5:30 to 6:30. And then I printed some programs for the Latin Mass tomorrow, Friday, and then I came here. And my goal is to go to the gym tonight, so we'll see. That's why I ate a lot, because I wanted to find motivation.
I've seen the video out on YouTube on how your progression of how you became a priest. And I found it very interesting because it's like 180 degrees from where you thought you were going to be and whatever. I'm just curious because you've got a very large family. Did anyone in your family, when you said, okay, I've decided to become a priest, turn around and say, oh, we saw this coming?
To me?
Yes.
Yes, I mentioned when I was maybe 5 or 6, well, from like age 5 to 8, I said that I wanted to become a priest. And so, but obviously, this is just a child, saying these things. And there was an interest that my parents and my siblings didn't see in any of my siblings, but only in me, about studying the faith. There was 1 year before I moved to America that I had 3 jobs in Mexico, and one job was in my university, my alma mater, a Catholic university, and I was working there as the webmaster. And they offer a certification for theology, and it was free for any employee. And so I got excited about that, and I told my parents that I was enrolled in that. And so they saw me, kind of like, talking about these topics with them. There was a Mormon temple very close to my parents' home, and there's Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, and there's another Christian denomination close by, and obviously parish. And so Saturday mornings we would get many visits, and I would be almost like waiting for them just because they gave me food for thought. Also in the Catholic University, my boss, she was an evangelical Christian, and another woman there working in the library where my office was, she was a Jehovah's Witness. So every single day I was challenged about my faith, and I realized that I didn't know anything. And so my parents saw that I was struggling a lot, and to the degree that my mom thought that this kid of mine is gonna leave the church, because I had so many doubts about everything. But what my mom didn't know, or maybe she was so scared about me leaving the Catholic faith, is that in my heart, my prayer to God was, Lord, if I come up with a question that the Catholic Church says it's because I teach it and that's it, there's no more explanation, I would accept it. So I knew deep inside me that I was not going to leave the church. But I remember saying, but if there is a rational answer to all these questions, or evidence in Scripture, or even in historical documents, I want to know. I want to defend my faith. So there was already kind of like that desire to know more about my faith that my parents and siblings didn't see in any of the other brothers and sisters. And so maybe that's why when I said, and then also when I moved here and I was being involved in parish life, I also had friends and co-workers from other denominations, and so they were, again, the challenge was still there. And I remember I got more serious about my faith, and I sent 5 questions to my siblings on an email. I have 8 siblings, and so to each one, I'm the youngest, I sent 5 questions to them. I said, we say that Jesus is our Savior. Explain why. Yeah, questions like that. And I told my siblings, I want you to answer these questions. I want to get to know you, and because I've been reading a lot, and if you're struggling with some of these questions, I want to help you. And so my siblings were like, wow, I never thought, of these questions. And some of them, they answered, and I was like, okay, well, they kind of know their faith, and other answers were like, okay, this is terrible. And so I'm like, what? Are you Catholic? So, I was, that kind of made me have a conversation with my siblings. And so they kind of was like, what's going on with Ricardo? What's going on with him? So in a way, when I told them, it was not very surprising. I mean, it was, but it wasn't at the same time. They all supported me, let's put it that way. Nobody called me and say, I'm worried about you. Are you losing your mind? Are you eating well? Because I'm thinking about myself here. Are you depressed? What's going on with you? No, nobody said anything like that.
I have a question on when you were mentioning about the baptism, and that in an emergency, as long as we say the right words, we could perform the baptism. But what constitutes an emergency? For you to
Danger of death.
Danger of death.
Yeah, so for example, and you can always call the priest, okay? And as a matter of fact, in 2.5 years of my priesthood, I've celebrated 4 emergency baptisms already.
I just had the occasion to do a committed graveside service of a 20-week gestated child. The grandmother was present when the child was delivered, and she baptized the baby.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
The thing is, okay,
I'm not sure that the child was alive, but anyway, she did
Right.
what she felt was necessary.
And sometimes parents don't want to accept the sad reality that their child may die. And so that's why they don't do anything. But the suggestion is, the doctors will constantly give you information, right? And they will say, we see something, in your child, and we're very concerned. So that, should be enough reason to either call the priest and be ready, or as soon as the baby, is born, to do the baptism. You don't have to have padrinos, godparents present, nothing, right? And it doesn't have to be holy water. It has to be water. Now, what if the baby makes it? What if the baby's alive? And which happened in one of these emergency baptisms. They have to present the child to the church, and we have to finish with the ritual here. We won't baptize the baby again with water, but we will do the anointings and the other prayers, the exorcism and everything, except the pouring of water. And then it's recorded in the parish, like normal. No, if the baby is born dead, no, because sacraments are for the living, not for the dead. And what do you do in those cases? Well, you entrust them to the mercy of God, which surpasses all understanding, right? And we should be, the Catechism has a paragraph or two about those cases, and it says that we can have the certainty that they are in heaven. We can have a great hope that they are saved, because they cannot commit personal sins, but obviously they are born with the guilt of original sin. But also there is a desire for the parents for that child to be baptized, and so God takes that intention so that the grace of baptism could come to the baby.
Sorry, folks.
One more question? Oh yeah, exorcism. Every diocese must have at least one exorcist. And every diocese has one, because by default, each bishop of each diocese is the exorcist. But they are at least one more or two more exorcists, which demand a different formation. They go to Rome to school, and they have to learn some psychology as well, because there's a team actually. When there's a possession, there's a team. There are psychologists, there's priests, there's a pastor of that person. Anyway, it's just a different team. And currently, the exorcist that was appointed here, I'm not sure if he's still the exorcist, but he was one of the Passionist priests in Bunker Hill, the Passionist Retreat Center. There's a community of Passionist priests, and one of them is the exorcist, but I don't know if he still is. I think he is. Barbieri is his name. Barbieri. Father Barbieri. However, it's not like you call him and it's like, I'm possessed, Well, believe it or not, we receive calls like that here. But that's the right thing to do. You should call your pastor first, or your vicar, or the parish priest. And then from here, we have like a certain set of questions, and we meet with the person. Usually, a good confession does it. It's not like the person is fully possessed, but it's just I forgot the degree. Obsessed. Yeah, the demon is obsessed with the person, but it's not, hasn't possessed the person's will. Okay? But yeah, it's very interesting. Now, if you want to know how many exorcisms are performed, here in this diocese, there's an average between 0 to 3 every year. That's so that you can have in your mind an idea. Okay, well, thank you very much. God bless you all. Please stand.